Okay, I think we're good. Petula, if you're good, we could begin our session. So hope everyone is enjoying their day. I'm the co-host for this session, and I'd like to introduce Patula Maxwell, who's the project manager at Indigenous Services Canada, BC region. Before we get her to introduce herself, as well as begin the session, I just want to let you know that it'd be good if everyone could mute their microphones, and then once she's completed her presentation, we can answer any questions that you have after, and if you can include those questions in your chat, I'll keep track of those, and then we'll get her to answer when the presentation is over. And just to remind everyone too that to provide your feedback on the WOVA app on the evaluation. So with that, I'll keep track, Petula, of those who are coming in. And if you'd like to begin your session, we're ready to roll.
Great. Thanks very much, Leona. Hi, my name is Patula Maxwell. I'm a project lead at Indigenous Services Canada in the Lands Operations program. And I'm coming to you from the shared territory of the Keetsi, Semiahmoo, and Tsawwassen First Nations and other Coast Salish peoples who call this beautiful area their home. And I'm here to talk to share information with you about conducting a designation process during the pandemic. And I'm just really happy to be here with you all today. I'm going to quickly go through some information. And as Leona mentioned, there will be an opportunity for a question and answer period right after this presentation. So I'm just going to go ahead and share my screen now. So this presentation is planning for a community designation vote during the pandemic. I'm going to move this over. Three things that I'm gonna go over during the presentation is what is a designation, a quick overview. I'm anticipating that many who signed up for this likely know what a designation is, so it's just going to be a quick overview, and I'm available afterwards for any questions you may have about the designation process. And then I'm also going to talk about planning for a designation during a pandemic, and then also the questions and answer period at the end of the presentation. So what is a designation? A designation is technically a non-absolute surrender under a process set up by the Indian Act and the Indian Referendum Regulations. So when a First Nation wants to do commercial leasing on a portion of reserve land, before the lease can be granted for the purposes, if the First Nation does need to have a leasehold interest, the land first needs to be designated. And in order to do a designation, we need to follow the Indian Referendum Regulations. And during this presentation, I'll share with you some key considerations of the Indian Referendum Regulations, which we've adapted to during the current pandemic. So some things that we'll talk about are the Electoral Officer, the information package mailout, the information meeting, and the polling station on reserve. So in accordance with the Indian Referendum Regulations, the Electoral Officer must be an ISC staff member appointed by the Minister. So oftentimes the Electoral Officer will be the Lands Officer from ISC who's working with the First Nation on the designation process. At this time, the First Nation is unable to appoint their own Electoral Officer for their designation process. And sometimes there's some confusion if the First Nation or its community members are not familiar with the designation process. Sometimes the First Nation may have an understanding that they can hire a contractor to be their electoral officer, because as many of you know, for chief and council elections, the First Nation hires a contractor. Officer is defined as a departmental officer. So at this time, the First Nation is unable to hire their own electoral officer. So again, during the pandemic, ideally, it would be the same as for chief and council elections when the First Nation can hire their own electoral officer, maybe someone from the community who often acts as the electoral officer. But under the designation and the referendum regulations, this electoral officer must be a departmental officer from ISC. Their key consideration is the information package mailout. These are paper documents that are part of the information package mailout. And at this time, Indigenous Services Canada takes the lead on the information package mailout. So for this, it means that departmental staff need to make appointments to go into the building, because for the Mel Street office, the Vancouver office of Indigenous Services Canada, staff are asked to work remotely away from the office. And if we do need to go into the office, it needs to just be for essential work. And if we do need to go in, we need to make appointments that need to be approved by a manager before we can go in. So because the designation process is considered an essential service, we are granted access to the office for the purposes of assembling and mailing out the information packages. Another key consideration is the information meeting. Before the pandemic, the departmental policy was that the ISC electoral officer would head to the community and attend the information meeting in person to provide information to the voters in the community about the designation process and what was to occur on the day of the referendum. But departmental management have determined that traveling for the purposes of an information meeting is not considered essential travel. So we worked with the First Nations and asked if they could include Zoom video conferencing option, or else dial in by phone for the ISC electoral officer to participate in the information meeting. And overall, except for one designation that we've worked on, the First Nations were able to include a Zoom video conferencing option for the information meeting. Typically before the pandemic, video conferencing was not an option that First Nations had considered for their information meetings. It was generally in person, very much like other types of community meetings where the members from the community are invited to come and gather and receive information and have their questions answered. There was one information meeting where there was some connectivity issues. So for that information meeting that happened during the pandemic, the ISC electoral officer was able to participate over the phone. And for the most part, First Nations communities are still including an in-person component to their information meeting, and they're using their gyms or meeting halls where they can physically distance their community members, because there's still a requirement that we try to maintain a 6-meter distance and wear masks, use hand sanitizer, disinfect high-touch areas. So that's those are types of things that we're discussing with the First Nations who still wish to proceed with the designation process during the pandemic. Another key consideration is the polling station on reserve. So on the date of the designation vote, the ISC Electoral Officer must establish at least one polling station on the reserve. So this includes the travel by a departmental employee who is the ISC Electoral Officer to go to the community for the purposes of establishing that polling station on the reserve. Again, these key considerations are part of the Indian referendum regulations, and they are requirements that we need to make sure that we're following in order to validate the designation for the First Nation. So for the before the ISC Electoral Officer can travel to the community, there needs to be a discussion with the First Nations representatives to ensure that they are comfortable with having an outsider, which would be someone like me, appointed as electoral officer, to come into their community for the purposes of conducting the vote. And we continue to check in with the First Nation leading up to the vote to ensure that it's still okay for us to go into the community. We're the outsiders going into the community. Oftentimes, many of us are coming from the Lower Mainland, and so we're crossing health regions. And as many of us know, the chief medical officer during the pandemic has really encouraged us and advised us that we are to stay home as much as possible and to limit our travel to essential travel only. And it's a pretty small definition of what is considered essential travel. So for Indigenous Services Canada, the designation process and the electoral officer traveling to the community to establish a polling station is deemed as essential travel. And there's very few ISC staff members who have been granted vote date. Someone like me, if I was able to negotiate a vote date with a First Nation after all of the designation documents have been finalized, I still need to obtain information or permission to travel to the community from my manager and from the director at ISC and from the Regional Director General's office before I can book that travel. During the current health orders from the public health officer, who has said that there's to be no travel between health regions. For travel that I recently did to conduct a vote for a First Nation, I obtained from my ISC director, a letter confirming that I am traveling for essential purposes in case I ran into any roadblocks or if I was stopped during my travel, either at the airport or at the car rental place or on my way to and from the community for the purposes of conducting the vote. And when I get to the prior to the vote, about 2 weeks prior to the vote, I put together a package of PPE containing masks, hand sanitizer, disinfectant wipes, tape, and other types of materials that I'll need at the polling station. And I put all that in a box and I mail it off to the First Nation ahead of me. Again, for most of the travel, we're traveling by plane. And I'd either need to check that baggage because the hand sanitizer is larger than the allowable amount allowed for carry-on baggage, or I'd need to check the bag. But what we've been doing is putting together that box of PPE and mailing it ahead of time and ensuring that. So I continue to do that, and I become even more aware of that just before I travel to a community. So a few weeks before I go to conduct a vote for First Nation, I really restrict how much I need to go outside of my home and really make sure that I'm following all of the public health protocols that are put in place. So on the day of the vote, heading in, I am wearing double masking, and I also have some good N95 masks that I use when I'm on the plane, and hand sanitizer. Thankfully, travel within BC, it's an hour and a half in the air at most for most of the communities that we're traveling to. So I travel directly to the airport, get in the plane, maintain physical distancing. As soon as I get to the airport and get in the car rental, I go immediately to the hotel. And again, limiting any exposure I may have to others. And then I go directly to the community. And even the day before I go into the community, I'm checking in with the First Nation rep to ensure it's still okay that I come into the community. And then coming into the community as the electoral officer, I can appoint deputy head. Yep.
Petula, we're experiencing your going in and out sometimes on your presentation.
Oh, do you want me to hide my video? Maybe that might help.
Maybe that would be good if you could shut down your virtual background. It may help. AV fellow said that might be a consideration there.
Okay, so I turned mine off. And then
Okay.
how far back should I go, or should I just continue?
No, I think yeah.
Okay. 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 Sorry about. Thanks for letting me know. So on the day of the vote, I rely on the First Nations representative who is going to be acting as my deputy electoral officer, and the two of us set up the room so that there's room for people to come into the polling station and people are not crowding at the entrance to the polling station. We try to lay it out so that there can be physical distancing between the voters. And in the polling station, just before you enter it, we set out the hand sanitizer and masks. There is a notice that goes out in the information package about COVID-related safety protocols that we will be observing at the polling station. So people are encouraged to wear a mask, and if they don't have a mask, we have masks available for them to use while they're in the polling station. And again, we try to space out the voters. Generally speaking, on the vote date, people will come in one or two at a time. Sometimes they'll come together in the same vehicle and they're the same household. And sometimes with elderly voters, they'll have a family member with them who's helping them at the polling station. I just want to step back quickly with regards to the information packages about the COVID notice that I just mentioned. We started to insert COVID-related safety protocols in the information packages, encouraging voters to vote by mail-in ballot, and also to kind of what they'll be seeing when they come into the polling station, such as the use of hand sanitizer, requirement for voters to use masks unless they have a respiratory ailment, also the physical distancing that will happen at the polling station. Under the Indian referendum regulations, there's a requirement that a notice of referendum be posted in the community, and also that information packages be mailed to the off-reserve voters for whom the First Nation has addresses for. And after the pandemic started and First Nations wished to proceed with their designation process, the department took the step of also mailing an information package to the community members living in the community. We have a requirement under the regulations that information packages must be mailed to community members living away from the community, but during the pandemic, we're also mailing the packages to the on-reserve community members. So that's something that is new during the pandemic. And in the packages are information sheets encouraging all the voters, whether you live in the community or away from the community, to use the mail-in ballot to vote in the designation. under the Indian referendum regulations, as I mentioned earlier, there is a requirement that we establish, that I, as the electoral officer, establish at least one polling station on the reserve. So there's always the option for the community, for the voters to come into the polling station to cast their ballot. That's their democratic right. They can come in the polling station, but we're providing them with an additional option of also mailing in their ballot. So they can either mail in their ballot prior to the vote, during the day of the vote. When I have the polling station established, they can hand deliver their mail-in ballot to me or the DEO at the polling station, or they can come and cast their ballot on in the polling station on the day of the vote. So providing the information packages with the ballot packages to the on-reserve voters is something new that we started to do during the pandemic. And again, in the polling station, I'm maintaining at least a 2-meter distance away from the appointed deputy electoral officer. So far, it's been me and another deputy electoral officer. We have hand sanitizer. I also, from the office, what I mailed in the package, the box beforehand is also boxes of pens and pencils. So if a voter comes in and they want to use their own pen, they're free to do that. If they want to use one of our pens, we sanitize them between use. And if they want to keep the pen, they're free to keep the pen and take it away with them. And so far, people seem to be comfortable doing that. And we just keep an eye on to ensure that as people are coming in, that they're maintaining that 2-meter distance from each other. And generally speaking, I find that the voters who are coming in are well aware of the COVID safety related measures and are taking it upon themselves to maintain that distance. And as a outsider, as the ISC electoral officer, I really rely on the deputy electoral officer who's working with me to kind of keep an eye on that, because I'm a stranger in the community, and the First Nations that we're working with for these designations, they already have their own COVID related precautions in place. So I'm respectful of the precautions that they put in place, and I find out beforehand if there's anything I need to know that I'll need to follow in order to maintain that safety in the community. So those are kind of the key considerations that come out of the Indian referendum regulations and how we're able to continue on with the designation processes during the current pandemic. I did want to share with you, and that not to worry, because these resources will be available to you through the website for this workshop. But this just wanted to give you a copy of this document that we received from the ISC. Governance officers, and this is with regard to taking place.
Petula, could you go over that again? We missed all what you said. Thanks.
Okay, sure. So this document, which you see on your screen, this is a copy that I received from one of my colleagues in the band governance unit. This is a notice that that the department has been sharing with First Nations who have chief and council elections, and these are some of the precautions that are taking place at those polling stations. And this information was gathered from First Nations early on in the pandemic who were conducting chief and council elections. So this is information that the ISC governance officers gathered from those First Nations who already had chief and council elections. And then we took this document and we modified it for of a designation vote. So this is the template that we created in ISC BC region lands with regards to the designation processes we have underway. And this type of document is what we're including more often in the information packages mailed to the First Nation voters. And again, to the First Nation voters who live on reserve and off reserve. So again, encouraging people to vote by mail-in ballot if they can. And then also during the information meeting that there is going to be a video conferencing option for the people living in the community if they feel more comfortable participating in the information meeting from their homes using the Zoom link, or they're welcome to come into the hall or the gym where the information meeting is being held, and that there will be physical distancing measures in place and hand sanitizer and mask wearing while at the information meeting. Again, the information meeting is a requirement under the Indian referendum regulations. It's part of our efforts to maintain informed consent by the voters. So at the information meeting, it's really important that we provide to the voters information about the project. So that would be the First Nation providing information to the voters about the project. And then someone like me from the department providing information about the designation process and what's going to happen on the day of the vote at the polling station. And then during the voting day, we want to provide like a heads up to the voters. Please wear a mask. There will be masks made available to you. Maintain that 2-meter distance. We bring plenty of hand sanitizer, so people are free to use that hand sanitizer while they're in the polling station. If they want to bring their own pen or pencil, they're free to do that. If they want to take the pen that they use, that we provide to them, they're free to do that. In between voters, me and the DEO, we ensure that we're wiping down the voting tables, the tables where the voting compartments, we're wiping it down with hand sanitizer wipes. And also any pens and pencils that are in there, we wipe those down in between each voter. And then quite frequently during the day, on the day of the vote, I take the hand sanitizer, or the DEO will take the wipes, and we'll go and wipe down high touch surfaces like the exterior door coming into the hall of the polling station or the gym or the administration office, whichever one it is. Any high touch surfaces that the voters may come into contact with as they're coming in to cast their ballot. So we're doing that during the vote. And of course, myself and the DEO, we are wearing masks, non-surgical masks all day at the polling station. And I keep a supply of these non-surgical masks on me. And I am changing mine during the day because the moisture will start to build up on my mask during the day, making them less effective. So I do change my mask during the day, and I also encourage the DEO to also change their mask. So these are some of the things that we're doing to try as much as possible to ensure that we are creating as much safety as we can in the polling station.
Petula,
Leading up and during the vote, and also, yeah, go ahead.
You're cutting in a little bit more than usual.
Okay.
Is there anyone in your household that is using the internet?
Let me just double check. My son is here, so I'm just going to double check. Hold on. Let me check.
And that would help.
Okay, so we're limiting our internet usage. Sorry about that.
No worries, thanks.
Okay, so For contact, the lands operations program, this is the BC lands email address. And also we have the lands operations program that I'm in, we have a Dropbox link. And in that Dropbox link are handy information sheets about the designation process, leasing, permits, also templates for the commercial lease and locatee lease, and other types of handy lands related information in that Dropbox. So now, Leah, if anyone has any questions for me, I kind of went through that information quite quickly. Unfortunately, with the being choppy audio, if anyone has any questions, I'm pleased to take any questions people may have.
I do have a few here, Petula. Let me just get them in order here. We've got one question. I was wondering about what the impact of public health order was for designation votes. The order permits gathering for elections. Was wondering if the designation or ratification process is considered an election in compliance with the order.
Yeah, the ISC, Indigenous Services Canada, deemed the designation process as an essential service that we're providing to First Nations communities during the pandemic. The reason why it's considered an essential service is the designation process must be followed. It's not optional before a First Nation can be granted a leasehold interest for a project that they're working on. So the First Nation can choose not to go ahead with the designation process, but for projects that they have on reserve in their community where they need a lease in order to secure financing for their project. There's a number of designations we're currently working on for affordable housing projects on reserve, other types of projects that the community's been working on. And for many of these projects, they started before the pandemic. Now some projects are brand new during the pandemic, but many of these projects were delayed initially when the pandemic first started. So for the designation process, it is considered an essential service, and we're in compliance with the current health order.
We have another question here. So are you sending out mail-out ballots to both off and on-reserve voters?
Yes, the regulation, Indian referendum regulations require that we do send ballots to off-reserve voters for whom the band has addresses for. So we're continuing to do that, but we've taken an extra step of mailing the ballot packages to the on-reserve voters as well. So we're basically doubling up on the amount of information packages that we're mailing out. And again, these are for on-reserve voters for whom the band has addresses for, which oftentimes the band has all of the addresses, but so that we are doing for on and off reserve. Prior to the pandemic, these packages were mailed automatically to off reserve for whom the band had addresses for. It was always a right that on reserve voters had of requesting a information package be mailed to them at their on reserve address. That's always been an option, but now we're automatically doing it for everyone that the band has addresses for on and off reserve.
Wonderful. Just to remind everyone that Petula's presentation and documentation is on the, it will be available on the what is the name of that?
I just call it
site.
the,
Yes.
yeah, links
On the
to learning.
conference site, yeah, that's right, sorry. Thank you very much. I'm going to have a couple of more. BC First Nations have been responsible for providing crowd control, spacing to meet pandemic regulations and not the department. So whether this requires, so First Nations, BC First Nations have been responsible for providing crowd control spacing to meet pandemic regulations and not the department.
Yeah, the document that I shared earlier, that is a template that we're including in the information packages, and this information was gathered from First Nations who have already been holding elections for chief and council, and as the ISC electoral officers, we are having those candid discussions with the First Nation reps prior to the vote to encourage that we're following their protocols, safety protocols they have in place to protect their community members. So the notice that we send out is more of a heads up to the voters, and we're following the First Nations protocols that they've put in place to protect their community members. So again, we're the outsiders, and at the polling station, I rely on the Deputy Electoral Officer to take a lead in that regard, because again, I'm an outsider coming into the community, and I want to ensure that I'm following the community's safety protocols. So that hope that answers the question.
Thank you. Each ISC regions makes its own determination as to what is deemed essential based on the business continuity plan for the region in question. Is that correct?
That is correct. So for ISC BC region, as part of our continuity plan, the designation process was deemed to be an essential service.
Thank you. We do need to remove a lot from designations for highway purposes. So do we need to remove a lot from designations for highway purposes?
I wonder if that's a section 35 question, Leona.
Yes, it would sounds like maybe I could get Melissa to clarify that.
I'm wondering if the word designation, you know, when roads are designated or set aside for highway purposes, I'm wondering if that is more of the question.
Okay. Yes, she says, yes, we are doing supportive housing with BC Housing as well. We have 1.42 acres that a future highway, the land is designated for leasing. Let me read that to you again. Yes, we are doing supportive housing with BC Housing as well. We have 1.42 acres that a future highway, the land is designated for leasing.
So I would encourage the person who posed that question to discuss it with the assigned ISC lands officer who's assigned for that project. And if you don't yet have an ISC lands officer assigned for your project, get in touch with me or send an email to the BC Lands email address, and we'll ensure that, oh, someone just said you are assigned. Okay, can you contact me after the presentation and we can talk about this a little bit more.
Okay, so maybe I do have one that you mentioned. The BC Housing project. Is the information from BC Housing related to projects included in the information package? Is BC Housing allowed at information meetings where their projects are part or of the reason for the designation?
For the BC Housing projects that I've been working on that require a designation, the BC Housing representatives have been participating in the information meeting, and again, only virtually, not in person in the community. They've also been participating in the information meetings over Zoom video conferencing links. so that typically for an information meeting, sometimes a proponent will take part in the information meeting. It's the ISC Electoral Officer and the First Nations representatives. Sometimes those representatives include the proponent. So in this case includes the BC Housing representatives to provide information about the project and to be on hand if the voters have any questions about the project.
Wonderful. Well, Petula, we don't have any more questions available, but I just like to remind everyone, it's the WOVA app that you'll receive all her information related to her presentation and the document on that app. So please feel free to visit that, as well as, if you'd be so kind, to complete the evaluation form feedback on the WOVA app as well. Thanks again, Petula. That's wonderful information, and I hope that everyone was able to get most of it anyway. You know, we do go in and out with, but not as much as that we didn't understand what your whole presentation was all about. So that's wonderful.
Thank you so
All
much,
right.
Leona.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, so we do have a break coming up before our next session. So thank you, everyone. Be safe and happy. Take care now.
Thanks, everybody.